Hello, students. Welcome back to the next lecture on classical electrodynamics. And today we have lecture number 14. And that means today's class will be the continuation to the lecture number 11. Because especially in the last two classes, we started to solve a problem, which is a boundary value problem for electrostatic potential on a conductor. So, because it was a problem solving session, the last two classes, it is not the continuation of the theory. So, okay. So, in the last class, that means you have to consider the lecture number 11. We have been discussing on the dielectrics. That means we are considering the collection of dipoles. So, suppose if you have a collection of dipoles in some region, and we were interested to calculate what is electric potential at far away distance from the collection of dipoles. That was the discussion that we made in lecture number 11, and we have understood in this way. In this way means the electric potential due to the collection of dipoles can be decomposed into two electric potentials. The one that is exclusively due to the volume bound charges, and another electric potential due to surface bound charges. So you are going to have some kind of charge distribution in the dielectric. And the dielectric being the material in which the electrons cannot flow freely. Okay, dielectrics are the materials wherein the electrons cannot flow freely. Therefore, we have to use the word bound. So any charge density will be bound charge density. And we always have two varieties, one due to the volume charge distribution. That means if the charges are distributed throughout the interior of the volume, and another charge distribution that only stays on the surface of the dielectric. So our understanding is therefore in this way that the total electric potential is due to the two reasons. One, due to the existence of the bound charge densities inside the volume of the material, and another charge density that stays on the surface of the dielectric material. So based on this, we are going to further understand how to write the Maxwell equation in presence of the dielectric, and then we would like to know whether there is any relation between these two charge densities. That means, do you have any kind of relation between the surface bound charges and the volume bound charges? You should remember that the volume charge density is given by the negative divergence of the polarization, and the surface bound charges is given by the normal component of the polarization. And polarization itself is nothing but the number of dipoles generated divided by total volume of the material. And the material got polarized because of the externally applied electric field. So the overall idea is therefore clear based on the previous lecture, and we would like to know what is the relation between these two charge densities, namely the surface bound charge density and volume bound charge density. That is one question that it is interesting to ask, what could be the relation, or do we have any relation at all? First thing. And second thing is that how the electric field is going to behave inside the dielectric. And whenever you have a dielectric, anyway outside the dielectric you have the air. Okay, if you have a glass, for example, or if you have a Teflon, whatever it is, any object that you have in your hand, that is a dielectric. But surrounding that particular object, namely surrounding the glass or surrounding the Teflon or surrounding any insulating material, you have the air. And the air itself is a dielectric material. So therefore, we can ask the question, what happens to the electric field inside the dielectric material, and when it is going to leave the dielectric, leaving the dielectric means when it is leaving the glass, for example, or the Teflon or any other insulating material you have, the electric field has to leave that, and then it has to come to the air. So when it is making a transition from one dielectric to another dielectric medium, what happens to the electric field? So these are possible questions that one can ask when you have material medium. If you don't have any material medium, of course, we always consider vacuum as the medium right from the beginning, in the sense that when you write down 1 divided by 4 pi epsilon naught, you have to pay attention to the symbol epsilon 0. The suffix 0 indicates that the expression is valid only in vacuum. So we don't have vacuum all the time, and therefore it is natural to ask when the dielectric medium is present in the system, what are the consequences? The first consequence is polarization, and because of the polarization, you have additional electric field getting generated, as we have seen in the last class, and therefore you have the total electric field. One is the applied electric field, the other is the electric field generated due to the polarization. And the consequence is that the behavior of the electric field at the interface of the two boundaries, two at the interface of the two dielectrics. When you have two dielectrics, we will get one boundary, isn't it? If you have true three-dimensional material, you take two three-dimensional material. For example, take a rectangular slab. If you take two rectangular slab, one is made up of glass, other one is made up of say plastic, for example, and if you are going to keep one on top of the other, then the junction between the two is what we call the interface. The interface between the two dielectrics, and that interface is a plane. So when you are going to start with a two-dimensional plane, then it is a result of three-dimensional object. So you should see one dimension is getting reduced. That's what I'm trying to say. If you start taking three-dimensional object, whether it is cube or rectangular box kind of thing, then the interface of two such materials would be a plane, and plane is a two-dimensional object. So therefore, we are interested to ask, or we are interested to know what could be the behavior of the electric field at the interface of two dielectric medium. So that could be the starting point, let us say, for the today's classwork. So today we are going to discuss on these issues, namely that we would like to know if there is any relation between the bound surface charge density and the bound volume charge density. First question, and the answer naturally comes in terms of the interface behavior, and therefore we also ask the question what could be the what could be the relation to be satisfied by the electric field at the interface of two dielectric material. So that is how we start today's class, and so let me therefore go to the board and then explain. So to start with, you consider the vacuum, and where you know that the relative electric permittivity or the dielectric constant is kept as 1. So we keep 1 as a reference value for vacuum, and for other mediums you can measure what is its value, and the values will be generally greater than 1. And therefore the basic definition you already know, that the electric permittivity is therefore a product of the value in the vacuum multiplied by a dimensionless number. So this is dimensionless, so all the dimension is taken care by epsilon 0. So when you start like this, the question therefore comes, other than vacuum, what else you have? So we can have good conductors, or we can have electrically insulating materials. So that is the biggest classification, or we say without going to much special classification, these are the broad classification where you can have good conductor of electricity and then the insulating case. And the one which is known about the good conductor is that inside the good conductors like copper, silver, etc., the electric field is always 0 inside a good conductor, whereas it is not going to be 0. And of course, you know why the reason. The reason for this not equal to 0 is because of the polarization that we have seen in the lecture number 11. The establishment of the electric dipoles inside the dielectric material is the reason why you don't have the electric field not equal to 0 inside. So today's class main work, if you see, we are going to discuss the polarization. So let me therefore come down here and then explain this graph. First I will explain this, then we'll let us go here. So this is an experimental evidence, of course, where you have the electric field versus polarization is drawn. So this is important. You have an origin here. We apply the electric field in volt per meter, kilovolt per meter, whatever it is. So that is how they apply the external electric field in a particular direction. You can control the direction in which the electric field is applied. So this is an independent variable you are applying, and the quantity under measurement is the polarization, which is nothing but the total dipole moment divided by total volume. That is how you calculate this. So if you perform an experiment, what happens is typically for a large class of materials, you get this kind of graph where you can easily distinguish, or you can divide the graph. Graph means you're starting from here, you go like this, and then deviating from the straight line behavior, and then saturating after some higher electric field. So that kind of behavior can be split into two regions. The region that is below the pink color, that means this pink color line, all the way to 0. So that is one region where the applied electric field is reasonably small when compared to the values that are applied above the pink color line. So typical field in practice is somewhere something like kilovolt per meter, uh, or even kilovolt per centimeter. So usually large fields are applied in order to observe this kind of behavior. But if you're going to keep the electric field to reasonably small value, in fact, you can't tell specifically some value, because the value all depends on the material under consideration. So if you change the material, the values will keep changing. But roughly speaking, anything of the order of 50 volt per meter, 100 volt per meter, so these are reasonably low electric field, in which case you can observe this kind of a straight line behavior, which means that the polarization is proportional to the electric field. So these are the data points. So you perform an electric field at this value, then you get that polarization. Like that, you keep doing the experiment, and until a particular electric field it keeps maintaining this kind of a straight line behavior. The important point being that you have 0, 0 as a value in this graph. That means if I don't apply any electric field, then this polarization is also 0. That is the 0, 0. So no external electric field means no polarization, and such materials are known as non-polar materials. You might have studied polar molecule in chemistry typically, and the meaning of the polar molecule is that this first point, the first point will not be 0, 0, but it will stay somewhere on the y-axis. Y-axis means the P here. So the P-axis, this particular first point will come, and all other points will be shifted up. So that's what it is. So that is known as the polar material. So polar material means you already have the dipole moment even in the absence of the electric field. So let us not go into that right now. Let us consider non-polar situation where 0, 0 will be the starting point. And what is very important is for the purpose of this particular course, namely the classical electrodynamics, we will be restricted to the linear regime. That means the region where the linear behavior is maintained. And the region where the nonlinearity comes into picture is generally a topic of research or specialization. Okay, maybe when you're doing a project, for example, you may consider some kind of a ferroelectric material and then do the measurement of polarization versus electric field. This is called PE hysteresis. You can perform the experiment, and then you can learn more about the nonlinear material. So that goes under specialization. Okay. Either you can do specialization in solid state physics, you study the material properties, or you can do an experiment in nonlinear optics where you can also understand the nonlinear behavior of this polarization. So these are the two different branches where you study in detail, or you specialize yourself into the nonlinear characteristic of the electric polarization in dielectric material. So that is the point. And then for the most general situation where you don't make any specialization, for the classical electrodynamics class or the course, we will be considering only the linear regime, which means that as long as the polarization is going to be a straight line for the applied electric field, all that region, okay, we will consider that as the linear regime. So this is very important. And where the polarization is proportional to electric field, the constant can be written down some k there. Okay, and this constant can be rewritten in terms of another constant that we will see later. So this is all about the graph. Now what you have in from the last class work is that the polarization, when you know, okay, that's what you calculate, right? So here you have the polarization, and you have the measured values are there. So in case if you have the functional relation, that means in the form of the equation, then you can always evaluate the divergence. So By evaluating the divergence of this polarization function that you got here, you can calculate the volume charge density. Of course, all the charges that are present in the dielectric are bound. Okay, so actually you can call this by the name volume bound charge density. Okay, bound charge density is there is nothing special there. Okay, so I would like to specify that we maintain the same symbol rho. Rho is the symbol for the volume charge density. So we are trying to maintain that symbol. But since we are talking about the dielectric medium, all the charge densities are bound, and therefore the B is written here under the suffix. And therefore we have got this expression. In fact, we have derived this expression in the lecture number 11. That's what we have written here. And the point is that whether it is going to be in the linear region or in the non-linear region, whatever be the region, if you have the functional relationship, for example, if you have an expression, then it is always possible to make this calculation that the divergence of the polarization will be equal to the volume charge density in the dielectric. So it's possible to find this density, but measuring the volume charge density directly is not possible. So that is where the importance of the last class, the lecture number 11, whatever calculation that we have performed, gives you an indication that the quantity rho b we can't measure directly, but what we can measure is the polarization vector, and these are therefore related. So let us therefore understand further on how to rewrite the P equal to Ke. That is first thing. And the second thing is that we have the Gauss law in electrostatic. So we would like to write down the Gauss law for the case of the dielectric medium. So that is that can be done quickly within 5 minutes. So let me therefore write down the Gauss law in the case of the vacuum. So this is the standard Gauss law that you know in the vacuum, where rho is the standard terminology, namely the charge density, which is enclosed within the Gaussian surface. So this is some standard starting point that you have in the case of the vacuum. You know that this is for vacuum because of the epsilon 0 here. So now what is the plan is that what is this rho here is the charge density. So now since we are going to discuss about the dielectric, the charge density could be the bound charge, and then plus any other charge that you are going to keep intentionally. So intentionally you can keep some charge, and then the bound charges will be present in the dielectric, and therefore what happens is this rho will be a combination of them. So I would like to therefore write down that the divergence of E will be equal to we will say that the bound charge plus any free charge. That means if it is present, okay, if it is present, then we say that is a total, then divided by the epsilon 0. So you can understand what you mean to say in this particular place is that the rho is therefore composed of all possible combination of this. And when you are writing in the case of the vacuum, it is quite natural that you don't have bound charges naturally. In vacuum, epsilon 0, right? So in vacuum, you don't have any bound charges. So this is naturally 0. So any charge that is present in the system is only free charge. That is how you understand, and therefore you don't bring into picture free, bound, etc. There you don't bring into picture, because any charge that is present will be free to move. But in the case of dielectric, it is not so. You already know that the bound charges are present. So there is a point to be noted about the rho free here. Okay, it requires a little bit of explanation. How do you understand the rho free? Rho free can be understood in two ways. One is you can deliberately keep some additional charges on the dielectric. That is one option, in which case we can call it by the name rho free. That is one option. There is a second option is that out of several electrons, so let us assume that there are something like, if you are going to assume approximately 10 to the power 28 electrons per meter cube, okay, whatever number that you are going to assume, there is no guarantee that all these electrons in the material will be involved in the process of polarization. Process of polarization means what? You must have the charges slightly disturbed from its original equilibrium position, and therefore they must give rise to dipoles. So the charges that are present in the dielectric medium should give rise to dipoles. If it is the case, we say polarization has taken place. But the point to be noted is that all such charges which are present in the dielectric might not have participated. All the charges might not have participated in the generation of dipoles. And therefore, if at all, if there are charges that are left out without generating the dipole, those charges we will call it by the name rho free. That's all about it. So such charges we can call it by the name rho free, whether it is free to move or not. It may not be really free to move, but however, in order to distinguish it from this particular situation, that is rho bound means it is the charge density as a consequence of dipole. So you are counting it as a part of dipole here. Here you are counting the charges where dipoles have not formed, but still such charges are inside the dielectric. So that is how you have to understand. And therefore the bound charges, charge density, surface charge density that we talked in the lecture number 11, they are real. I mean, so they are there actually. It is not an imaginary situation, or that you should not think that it is mathematical concept. Okay, the rho bound, rho free, whatever we are talking about, they are actually they are present inside the material. As you can see from here, polarization is experimentally measurable, means you can always calculate divergence of P and you get a number. So that charge density is there in the material, in the real life. It is a realistic thing. So this is the point to be noted, and therefore let us rewrite this expression. So let me therefore rewrite. Only thing is that I want to use the equation number 1 here. So using the equation number 1, we can rewrite like this: divergence of E equal to that 1 by epsilon naught you keep. So the first part I will write it as this. Second one is rho free. So this is clear that the rho bound is actually minus divergence of P. That's what I have written here. And then plus, this plus is there, rho free. This rho free you simply copy here. We don't know its value. Okay, so all that is known is that the bound charges can be calculated from the divergence of the polarization, where the polarization itself can be performed as an experiment. But if at all any charges are present inside the dielectric which did not participate in the polarization mechanism, such charges we will call it by the name rho free, and we do not know how much it is, but it will be there inside. In addition to that, rho free could also represent the charge density that we can keep intentionally or deliberately. Okay, so that point I would like to write down. We can generally say that if charges are kept deliberately, then it is not equal to 0. Okay, let me therefore simplify. The equation is simple. Yeah, here, so the simplification is quite easy. With this divergence of P, I'm bringing to the left side. So you have the same expression here. Epsilon 0, you take a cross multiplication. So it has come here. And then this divergence of P is kept as such. No change. This rho free, what happens is, if you are intentionally keeping, then it is not equal to 0. If you are not keeping anything, then it is 0. That is what I mean to say. So rho free can become 0. So you can possibly make it 0 and write down here. If no charges are intentionally kept, it's optionally you can make 0. But let us bring in general later. Now what I'm trying to say is that after this, the divergence of P term, you take it to the left side. So the divergence is common, right? So the P can be brought to the left side, and therefore I can write like this. So the quantity inside is important. So let me highlight here. Epsilon naught times E plus P is the quantity that you have to pay attention. And we will call this kind of an object as the electric displacement vector. So let us call it by the name electric displacement vector. And then I would like to write down that, but there is a point. I think this epsilon 0 is to be deleted. Let me delete that. This epsilon 0 is already taken to the cross multiplication, right? So this must be deleted. That's what I'm trying to say. So once you delete this, then you can understand what we are writing. This quantity is what we are going to give the name. It's only renaming to a different name called d vector. So if you call this object as a d vector, then we say that the divergence of the d vector will be equal to the row free. So row free will be generally 0 when you don't apply intentionally, or if you are applying, it is a known quantity, so we can always evaluate this. So this equation which is written in this particular form is what is known as the Gauss law in presence of dielectrics, and therefore this is an important result. So this is known as the Gauss law in presence of dielectrics. So the most probable question will be, derive the Gauss law in presence of dielectrics. So you'll have to explain all these things and then summarize this. Let us again come back to the definition that we have, namely the capital D. So this quantity which is written here, we will simplify based on our experiment in the linear region. So what is in the linear regime is that the electric polarization is going to be proportional to the electric field, the graph that we have seen some time back. And because of the constant of proportionality, we put a constant k here. And this constant can be rewritten in terms of some other constant. So let me therefore write down in terms of two constants, where you say that k itself is written as a product of, we already know k is some number. So divide this k by epsilon naught. Whatever comes, you put it as chi. That's all about it. So because epsilon 0 is something which is very standard value for the vacuum. So let that be there. Then other than epsilon 0, what is coming is therefore exclusively due to the dielectric medium. So that is how you try to understand this kind of rewriting the constant. And since epsilon 0 takes care of all the dimensions, chi e will not have any dimension. So this chi e is actually a dimensionless number you have. And this kind of expression, as I already told you, is valid only in the linear region. So when you are performing the experiment, provided that you have limited the strength of the electric field in such a way that the polarization graph is a straight line, only then this equation is valid. If you are going to the nonlinear regime, then this equation is completely wrong. We can't write like this. So this is very important point, and therefore keeping this point, we will therefore make an emphasis here. The emphasis is that we are always going to talk within the linear regime. And now what we will do is that this expression for the polarization we can substitute here. So that what will happen is this d can be simplified. So that's what I'm trying to do. So let us therefore give some number. So I would like to substitute equation 2 in equation 1. Then what happens? And then take an epsilon 0 is common. And now that chi e is a dimensionless number, 1 is also a dimensionless number. So that's why we can, when this is a number, this is at 1 plus means it is going to be another number. And we will call this number to be the relative permittivity. And therefore we can write down like this. So we are going to give the name, that's all about it. If we are going to define the quantity to be epsilon r, then we can rewrite the expression in a much simpler appearance like this. And as usual, the product epsilon 0 and epsilon r can be defined as epsilon without any suffix. So d will be equal to epsilon into E vector. Okay, so here you have both the places suffix is there. So here you don't have suffix. So this is simply a compact way of writing. That's all about it. And epsilon 0 takes care of all the units. Epsilon r doesn't have any unit. But when you are writing like this, you have to be careful to write it as a product when you are simplifying. Otherwise, you may forget. Okay, but when you write like this looks in a much compact notation. That is the reason. And once again, the point to be noted is that all these things are coming because of the linear region only. In the non-linear region, this is not correct. I mean, this is not valid. So therefore, the point has to be emphasized. And therefore, let me therefore write down that the entire expression that we have written down is valid only for the linear regime. Okay, so whichever equation is important, I am just highlighting. So let me therefore write down that the validity of this equation. You can't remember, you can't close your eye and say this equation is valid all the places. Okay, it is not possible. So what is the validity of these equations that we have written down? So it is valid only for the linear case if the material is homogeneous, if the material is isotropic, okay, provided that the material happens to be satisfying these conditions, this equation is valid. Linearity is something clear because I have already explained. Homogeneous and isotropic require some explanation. So therefore, I would like to make some simple explanation for what is meant by homogeneous and isotropic. So the statements and the explanation are going to be very simple. So first point is that how do I define? So what I am trying to say is how do I know whether the given dielectric material is a linear dielectric medium? That is a question. So the answer we are going to say. Suppose if you take a dielectric material and you are going to put an if condition. What is the if condition is whenever the polarization is going to be written down according to this equation, that means equation number 2, then within that limits we can call the dielectric material by the name linear dielectric. So this is the definition for linear dielectric. It is not that you can give the name of the material. Okay, suppose if I tell you glass, or suppose if I say Teflon, and then ask the question whether Teflon is linear dielectric, then you say we can't tell the answer because question itself is wrong. You can say that Teflon is dielectric, that only you can say. Whether it is linear dielectric or not, you cannot say. Then how do you know whether it is a linear dielectric is that if you are going to maintain your experiment in such a way that the strength of the electric field is low enough to maintain this relation, then we say that whatever dielectric material that you have is in the linear regime. So that is the meaning. It is not that the material is classified into linear dielectric and non-linear dielectric. That definition is totally wrong, or that is a wrong conception. You are trying to misunderstand the interpretation. So we can't say that glass is linear dielectric, Teflon is non-linear. That kind of idea itself is wrong. So therefore, I would like to write down clearly that whenever the equation 2 is satisfied, or you perform in such a way that it's satisfied, okay, that is what it means, then we consider that dielectric material to be a linear dielectric material. That means it could be any material. So now it is clear that any material you can consider, any dielectric material you can consider, and then you maintain your experiment in such a way that equation 2 is valid. In that case, what happens is the set of all dielectric materials that you considered will become linear dielectric material. So that is the meaning. You can't give the name of the material, okay? Every name of the material, whatever name that you write, you can always make that particular material in the linear region. So this is the first point. Okay, second point is about the homogeneity. Okay, linearity is first one. The second thing is about the homogeneity. Homogeneity means how uniformly the material is polarized inside the volume of the material. Material is a three-dimensional object, right? So polarization, if you are going to consider, this epsilon 0 is a constant, isn't it? It's a constant for vacuum. So it's a constant. We don't want to distinguish between material to material. Epsilon 0 is going to be a constant. Therefore, it will not affect. Then we are going to keep some fixed value for the electric field. Okay, we are going to keep some fixed value of the electric field. So once E is also fixed, it's a fixed number, epsilon 0 is also fixed, then polarization can be explained in terms of this number chi E, isn't it? So polarization, even though three terms are there, only chi E we can consider for the polarization because the remaining two of them are going to be held to some fixed value. And therefore, now we can now tell what is meant by homogeneous dielectric material. So homogeneous dielectric material is one in which we can say that this particular quantity chi E is uniform everywhere inside the volume of the material. That's all about it. So therefore I would like to write down that. So this definition is clear. We have to be careful about, throughout the volume. That is the point you have to remember, that the value of the chi should not change from place to place inside the dielectric. Then it is known as inhomogeneous. It is like mixing. Okay, if you are taking, let us say, sand and cement, when you are mixing, homogeneous mixture means what? The amount of sand and the amount of cement mixture, that ratio should be same wherever you put your hand in that mixture. That's all about it. That's what you mean to say. So the chi should have the same value in the interior of the dielectric, wherever be the case. Okay, that's the meaning. So that is why we say it is throughout the volume. So these two things are quite simple. Now the third one that I'm trying to write down is regarding the isotropy and anisotropy nature. And you must have studied a little bit on a tensor, at least an introduction to the tensor. Certainly you don't require much about it, but little bit knowledge about what is meant by a tensor. uh, how do you distinguish, or why should a tensor, first of all, we need? Okay, that discussion we have studied in the classical mechanics, sometime in probably in learning the moment of inertia. So remember, in classical mechanics, when you are studying the moment of inertia, in our lecture, I don't know the lecture number, but in that lecture I explained you why, first of all, we need a tensor quantity, why it is required. So the answer we have seen in that lecture, namely in classical mechanics lecture, that whenever a particular physical property is dependent on direction, then mathematically such objects are known as tensor quantities. Okay, even though you call it by the name tensor quantity, ultimately it looks like a matrix. So if you know the matrix operations, then a tensor can be quite simple for you. So performing tensor operations are going to be simple, because these tensor quantities are going to be matrices actually. Especially in 3 dimension, it is going to be much simple. Okay, unlike in the case of the relativity, where you go to the 4-dimensional Minkowski space, that tensor is a little bit complicated than what we are going to discuss. So in the present situation, where you are going to perform an experiment with the dielectric medium, we are talking in the 3-dimensional Euclidean space. Okay, therefore, in the case of the 3-dimensional Euclidean space, tensors are much easier, because there is no difference between covariant tensor and contravariant tensor. You don't have a distinction at all. If at all you say that we have two varieties, then both of them are identically same. Okay, so the distinction between the covariant tensor and contravariant tensor disappear in the sense that both of them are identically same. So you don't require such a kind of distinction, and we simply call it by a tensor. That's all about it. But in the case of the relativity, we don't have the 3-dimensional Euclidean space, but rather we have a 4-dimensional non-Euclidean. Non-Euclidean is exactly the Minkowski space. So in that particular space, since it is not a Euclidean space, naturally what happens is tensor behaves differently, and therefore we have the distinction between the covariant tensor and contravariant tensor. So therefore, in our situation, in the present situation, where our discussion are going to be limited to the Euclidean 3-dimensional space, tensors are as simple as matrices, and therefore nothing to worry about. Only thing is that you have to keep track of the number of index. Okay, so this being the what you call the background information that you will be having, let me therefore write down what do you mean by isotropic dielectric material. So if you are going to if your value of the chi is going to be same for all directions, all direction means, let me write down x direction, y direction, z direction. If they are all same, then we will give it the name isotropic dielectric. So the definition is going to be simple. If it is independent of direction, isotropic. Okay, so what are the important terminology? So the important terminology is the linear dielectric, homogeneous dielectric and isotropic dielectric. So that is the definition. And once you understand what is isotropic, then this combination is what is known as LHI. So you have a combination, right? Linear, isotropic, homogeneous. So that combination we can say that LHI dielectric. So within the limits of the classical electrodynamics course, any properties, any studies, any problems that you are going to perform, they are all limited to the LHI dielectrics. That means linear, homogeneous, isotropic dielectrics. For the purpose of completeness and for the purpose of understanding, I would like to define what is meant by an anisotropic dielectric. In this, now itself, let me define. Actually, the definition of the anisotropic dielectric and further details are not required. But at the same time, you should know what it is. Okay, a little knowledge about what is the meaning of anisotropic dielectric is required so that your understanding is better. So therefore, I will tell you or I will now write down how the dielectrics are classified based on the isotropic and anisotropic. So I'll go to another place. Let me move, and here let me write down how the dielectrics are splitted. I mean, they divided. One is the isotropic dielectric. The other one is the anisotropic dielectric. So each one of them can be further divided into linear dielectric and non-linear dielectric. So even in the previous case also you can do, and here also you can do. So in both the cases, linear, non-linear. Okay, that's all about it. And this is how the classification is going to be. So let me finish some lines and other things. Then we can write down the expression. So the classification is quite simple and you must be able to do. So the main classification is that isotropic and anisotropic. And within each heading, you make it linear, non-linear, linear, non-linear. So ultimately, how many combination you'll have? Linear isotropic, non-linear isotropic, linear anisotropic, non-linear anisotropic. So there are 4 of them are there. So for each one of them, that means for all the 4 of them, how the equation for the polarization will look like. So this is P. How the equation for the polarization will look like. That's what we are going to write down. So out of the 4, which of them are the easiest one or the simplest one? Always linear is the simplest one. Therefore, linear is simplest one in this case. Again, linear is simplest in this case. The next difficulty comes to the nonlinear. So nonlinear is there, nonlinear is there. Out of these two, which is easy means isotropic is always easier than anisotropic, because anisotropic means tensor. Isotropic means scalar. So scalar is easy. So this is scalar, this is tensor. Linear means electric field to the power 1. Non-linear means electric field to the power 1, power 2, power 3, any power. So therefore, now you see which is easy and which is difficult. Linear is easy, non-linear is difficult. Isotropic is easy, anisotropic is difficult to deal with. By difficult, what I mean to say is, the equations will be getting little complicated, it will get lengthy and all that is there. But ultimately, coming to the understanding point, it's all fine. Okay, you can also understand the nonlinear anisotropic. It is possible to understand. I am not saying that it is difficult that you have to run away from the place. It's not like that. What I am trying to say is that when you are learning, you start learning from the linear isotropic. Next, you go to a linear anisotropic, so that both the linear cases you understand and you also understand a little bit about isotropic and anisotropic. So both of them are simple and you can learn. Then afterwards, what you do is come to the nonlinear isotropic, so that you deal with the scalar and you only deal with powers of the electric field. Electric field to the power 1, electric field to the power 2, etc. And last you come here, namely electric field is also having power, and then you also have tensors of various rank, second rank tensor, third rank tensor, etc. So this is how the difficulty level slowly increases. And let me just quickly write down how the equation is going to be looking like for all these four cases. Okay. So the simplest one is the linear isotropic, which is already explained to you. There is nothing new. So therefore, second case we will go. In the case of the anisotropic situation, you have to write down in terms of tensor. So I will use the suffix notation. So you write down p suffix I. Suffix notation is used for the tensors. Epsilon 0. Now the chi becomes a tensor. So you have two suffixes, and then you have the that is E, right? So electric field and then again tensor. So here the point to be noted, that E vector, electric field is a vector, right? But how do you write like this? And so here there is a vector quantity, but here we don't write it as a vector. Okay, the reason is quite clear. Ej means, E1, E2, E3. That means electric field first component, second component, third component, which are respectively the XYZ components of the electric field, and therefore the information about the vector is automatically taken care when you're writing in the tensor notation, namely the suffix notation. And similarly, this represents the three components of the polarization vector. So this equation is actually representing one component. So you have to write down this expression three times. One for the first component, another for the second component, etc. That is how you write down. And coming to the this particular chi e here, you have a scalar, as I already told you. For the linear case, linear means a scalar. Therefore, chi e is a scalar, is a single number. But when you are moving to the case of the linear anisotropic case, it has become a tensor, and since you have the two suffix here, it is known as the second rank tensor, and it is the usual. This is the usual Einstein summation convention. That means when you are going to have the same index, what is called a repeated index, okay, the same index is repeated, then the index has to be summed over. And therefore what happens is, this is supposed to be written as chi I1 E1 plus chi I2 E2 plus chi I3 E3. So if you write like this, then what happens is that all the j will disappear. So repeated index will naturally disappear. It will always happen. So repeated index will disappear, and what is left out is only this I is left out, and that I will be transferred here. That is why the same I should be there. So you cannot write randomly some symbol there. So after the disappearance of the repeated index, whatever single index is left out, that index has to be transferred to this place, this particular equation. So this is the standard rule. Of course, as you have already studied the little introduction to the tensor in the moment of inertia, then how this is written, it is quite clear. So therefore, the equation is going to be simple even in this particular case, because linearity is maintained. If you are going to move to the nonlinear case now, what happens is that the electric field to the power 1 is there now. Ej to the power 1, electric field to the power 1. So this power has to become power 2, power 3, etc. for the case of nonlinear situation. Now, before moving further into the nonlinear situation, I would like to explicitly write down how this equation can be written down in component wise. I told you that this can be written three times. But instead of writing this equation three times, we can also write down in the matrix notation. So therefore, let me write down this expression in the matrix notation. So the polarization is P1 to P1, P2, P3, and this chi ij being second rank tensor, you have 3 by 3 matrix. Then you have the electric field E1, E2, and E3. And of course, how do we know that whether this is a 3 by 3 matrix? Why it cannot go to a 4 by 4 matrix like that? If you ask the question, and there is a standard rule is there. The number of elements in the matrix is given by the number of dimension to the power rank. This is a standard rule. What is the number of dimension means? We are considering the three-dimensional Euclidean space. So three-dimensional means 3. So 3 to the power, remember 3 to the power. What is the rank? There are 2 suffixes are there. So 2 suffix means the second rank. 3 suffix means third rank. So since you have 2 suffix here, this is known as second rank tensor. Therefore you have 2. So already you have 3 to the power. So 3 to the power 2 is how much? 9. So you have 9 elements here. So the moment you see here chi ij, automatically the number of elements are well known and therefore one can write down easily. And now it is clear that if you multiply this, you will be getting one equation for P1, another equation for P2, etc. So this kind of a notation, namely the suffix notation or what you call the tensor notation, is quite compact rather than writing this big expression like this. So therefore, the tensor notations are the notations that are used to write down things in a compact manner. That's all about it. So let us therefore move on to the next case, namely the nonlinear case. So I'll consider the nonlinear isotropic case now. Now since it is isotropic, scalar is there, but because of the nonlinear, powers of electric field will be there. So let me first of all write down the equation that we have a special case of the polar material, that is a P0, and then this is the standard first term. Let me write down, then I'll explain. And then the first term, let me say that this is due to the polar material. So the expression is quite simple. Forget about P naught, okay, for the time being. If you have polar material, only P0 will come. As I already told you, when you are going to consider the non-polar material, this term is 0. That means when you don't apply the electric field, polarization is 0. So that is gone. And second power, third power, if you delete them, second power, third power, fourth power, etc. If you delete them, we will be left out with only the first power of the electric field. That is what is known as the linear. So you are getting back the original, the first equation that you have written. So what is the meaning of the bracket here is just to say that it is not power. It is just to provide an information about the power of the electric field. So what is the power of the electric field here? Modulus of e to the power 1. That 1 is only written here. So if I am going to erase the electric field, if I am going to erase the epsilon naught, and if I am going to erase everything else, and only if this one is shown to you, that means chi e bracket 1, if I show that to you, then you must be in a position to recognize that this is the electric susceptibility corresponding to the applied electric field to the power 1. That is the purpose. The moment you see this kind of an expression chi e2, you can understand that this is the electric susceptibility that the material has given because of the applied electric field given by e to the power 2. That 2 is, what is this? This 2 is copied here. So similarly, the electric susceptibility because of the third power e cube is this much. So what is clear therefore is that the electric susceptibility will change if you increase the electric field power. That is the meaning. So you keep on increasing the power of the applied electric field, then the susceptibility value for the same dielectric material, remember, same dielectric material will change. That means for a particular given dielectric material, how many susceptibilities are there? You see, so many are there. This is known as first order susceptibility. This is known as second order susceptibility, third order susceptibility. So a single material will have n number of susceptibilities. This is the point to be noted. And another point is that as long as you are going to consider isotropic dielectric material, each one of the susceptibility will be a scalar quantity. So chi e1 is a scalar, chi e2 is another scalar. This is not power, okay? Chi e2 is a single number. So that is known as the second order susceptibility. It's a scalar. And Chi3 is a third order susceptibility. It's a scalar. These are all scalar because we are considering an isotropic material. So therefore, the total polarization, that's what it means. The total polarization of the dielectric material will be equal to the sum of all this combination because of the various powers of the electric fields. That is the meaning of this expression. And the first term is only due to the nonpolar material. Nonpolar material means what? Nonpolar material means with the applied electric field is 0, then polarization is also 0. So in which case this term is 0. Polar molecule means this will be non-zero. So therefore that term also, when you are adding it, you are actually bringing the polar molecules also into one number. So that is the reason for that. So third option is over, and then we'll move on to the fourth one. The fourth one is what we say the nonlinear as well as the anisotropic situation, and here we will bring the tensors. So I'll write down the Chi-ij, and that is the first order, and then you have the electric field. So, and this is for the clear, and then coming to the second power, I think once this electric field is common, so the bracket I'll put it outside because the electric field is common, right? So therefore I'll write down the third order susceptibility and multiplied by the second power of electric field plus third order susceptibility, and then I put the third power of the electric field plus etc plus like that. You'll have to repeat, and then the entire thing, and that's all about it. So let me give the labeling like second order, third order. Let me write down first of all, then it will be easy to explain. And the number of components I already explained, but I would like to explain it once again, so I am writing it here. So what is second order, what is third order, that is all written, and as usual this is the one which is the second rank tensor, third rank tensor, and then etc. Okay, so once labeling is over, it will be easy for me to explain. And what I'm trying to explain is that from where the n+1 came. Okay, let me explain this later. First of all, come here. Now what you understand is that let us not worry about the polar, non-polar. That's why P0 I didn't write. It is optional. Okay, P0, whether you write it or not, it all depends whether you are going to bring the polar material or not. So forget about the P0. And coming to the first, this is known as the first order susceptibility. And then this is known as the second order. It's written here, okay, second order. The bracket is the order, second order, third order, etc. So the order actually talks about the power of the electric field. E to the power 3, so Ej, Ek, El means we are trying to say that different values in different directions. That's all about it. Suppose if you are going to apply equal strength in all the three directions, then it is going to be E cube. So E cube means what? Therefore power 3 is there. Therefore this is third order. E square second order, e to the power 1 first order. So that is clear. Coming to the nature, whether it is a scalar or whether it is a tensor, how do I know is that the number of suffix that you have. If you have two suffix, second order, second rank tensor. Now order is changing. Now the name is rank. And similarly, three suffixes are there. We will call it by the third rank. Three suffix means third rank. Four suffix means fourth rank. I didn't write. Okay, this is third order is this 3. This 3 is coming here. Okay. Therefore, this must be a fourth rank tensor. So therefore, there should be a connection between rank of the tensor and dimensionality. Dimensionality means three-dimensional Euclidean space. So as I already explained, how many components, how many elements, component means elements, will be there in the matrix. I said that it's a matrix. How many elements will be there in the matrix if you are going to consider an nth order susceptibility? That's the question. So if you are going to consider a first order susceptibility, then its rank is equal to second rank. Therefore, if this is 1, this is 2. If this is 2, this is 3. Isn't it? So order and rank, what is the connection? You see, 1 extra is coming. Therefore, I'm going to write down that nth order susceptibility means n+1 rank tensor. So that is clear. Then what happens is, how many components will be there means Number of dimension to the power number of rank. We are talking about only 3-dimensional case. Therefore, 3 to the power. What is the rank? N plus 1. So the general formula also I will write down for clarity here. The general formula for the number of elements is given by number of dimensions. It's given by number of dimension to the power rank, whatever rank that you have. So this is how the expression, or this is how the expression is going to look like. And then here, coming to the appearance of this equation, as you already know, what is this object? Second rank tensor means what? 3 by 3 matrix. Just now we have seen, isn't it? 3 to the power 2. So this is a 3 by 3 matrix. You know how to multiply. Everything is clear. But then the question is how this will look like. How many suffixes are there? I, j, k, 3. Therefore, 3 to the power 3. So 3 to the power 3 is how much? 3 to the power 3 is 3 power 3, then into 3, right? So finally what happens? 27 is there, right? So the question therefore is, how do you write 27 elements? The answer is quite simple, that 27 elements means it's not difficult. It is 9 elements in 3 sheets of paper. So you must be in a position to imagine how this will look like. That's what I'm trying to explain. You try to imagine 3 sheets of paper. In one sheet of paper, you write down 3 by 3 matrix. In second sheet of paper, you write down another 3 by 3 matrix. And in the third sheet of paper, you write down the final 3 by 3 matrix. Now you count how many elements are there. First sheet you have 9 elements, second sheet 9, and then the third one is also 9. So 9 plus 9 plus 9 is 27. So therefore, if you ask the question how the third rank tensor will look like, how it will look like means it is a 3 by 3 matrix, but it is located one behind the other. It is like 3 sheets of paper. I have 3 sheets of paper. In each sheet of paper, I have a 3 by 3 matrix. That is how you have to visualize. Okay, this is not a single matrix. You can't write a single matrix of 27 elements. No, that's not possible. And that is why I am trying to visualize. Visualize means you must be able to see how it looks like. It will look like 3 sheets of paper. In each sheet of paper, I have a 3 by 3 matrix. Such object is known as third rank tensor. And similarly, when you're talking about the fourth rank tensor, naturally you can consider how many sheets of paper are required, and in each sheet what is the number of element. And you can easily calculate this 3 to the power of n plus 1. So the same idea has to be extended for higher rank tensor. So therefore, concept of tensor and other things, even though it looks like that, ultimately you are going to deal with matrices, and therefore all the matrix operations you know. And for that reason, this expression, even though it looks a little cumbersome, ultimately it is fairly understandable. It is easy to understand. So there is nothing difficult. So our conclusion, therefore, in our today's class, what is the conclusion that I would like to tell you is that the important concept of the polarization itself is not a simple concept because of this higher order terms come into picture. The conclusion is that a new study emerges in the nonlinear anisotropic case and a nonlinear isotropic case. And that particular new study is what we call either a nonlinear optics, for example. Either you can do a research in nonlinear optics, or probably you can do research in solid state physics and material science, where you consider a particular ferroelectric crystal and then study. Study means you apply the various electric field and then measure the electric polarization. So as you see, the nonlinear situations naturally enter into the research topic or kind of a project that you are going to do. Okay, and therefore that cannot be studied as a standard course like electromagnetism. It cannot be done within a standard course, but it will be considered as a project work or doctoral thesis work. So the topics that will be going under this classification is mostly nonlinear optics and study of the polarization of the ferroelectric crystal, for example, in the solid state physics. So this is how the branches evolve over a period of time. And one more thing that I would like to mention is that when you're talking about electric field to the power 3 here, This is not an easy thing to achieve. Okay, when you have 100, for example, 100 volt per meter, 100 square is 10 to the power 4, and you have 100 to the power 3 is 10 to the power 6. So 10 to the power 6 volt per centimeter or volt per meter is not something easy to generate using the usual methods, okay, like parallel plate capacitor. Even though you write like this, achieving the electric field of that high order or high power electric field is something not possible within the limits of applying using a capacitor, etc. Therefore, what happens is naturally lasers have the power. The electric field in the laser is quite high, which is required of this order of magnitude. So any number like e square, e to the power 3, etc., such high value is naturally available in the laser light. Okay, and therefore what happens is when you are performing an experiment in the nonlinear optics, naturally experimental situation, you have to bring laser into picture or lasers into consideration. Therefore, the study of the lasers and nonlinear optics go together. Okay, in the case of experimental physics, and in the case of the theoretical development, you can always study how the electric field is going to be, or you can solve certain differential equation governing the electric field. Okay, for example, how the electromagnetic wave can propagate inside the anisotropic crystal. Okay, this can be studied theoretically. So this gives you a overall idea how the electromagnetism is going to provide, or how the electromagnetism has given pathways to multiple branches of physics, which are the today's research topic. Okay, so that is a point that I would like to mention, and in this direction, probably today's class, let us stop here, and in tomorrow's class I would like to explain the relation between the polarization and how it is connected to the two charge densities that are there, namely the volume charge density and the surface charge density. That is first thing, and more importantly, we would like to learn what is the boundary condition to be satisfied by the field at the interface of two boundaries. So let me therefore stop here and move on to the topic in the next class.